You always smell of stale food. My husband shouted on me as I was trying to manage whole household and my newborn alone while he was playing video games. Now he is begging for my food. The sun had long since set, but the house still felt too bright. The sound of the television blared from the living room where my husband, Jeremy, sat glued to his game. I could hear him shouting into the microphone, his voice excited, almost manic. It was one of those nights again, one of the nights I felt invisible. I walked past the living room, carrying a basket of laundry in my arms. My back ached, my feet were sore from standing too long, and my arms were heavy from cradling our newborn all day. I hadn't had a moment to myself in what felt like weeks. My hair was tied up in a messy bun, and my clothes smelled of baby formula, dirty diapers, and the kitchen where I had spent hours preparing our meals. As I reached the kitchen, the smell of stale food hit me like a wall. The sink was overflowing with dishes. I hadn't had a chance to clean it up yet. Between taking care of the baby, cooking, and trying to keep the house running, I was drowning. I thought about my husband in the other room, in front of the screen. I thought about how we used to dream together, how he promised to be my partner. But here I was, doing everything on my own. And he, just playing video games. The baby began to cry from the other room. I sighed, closing my eyes for a moment. How much longer could I keep this up? I had finally settled into bed that night, the baby in his crib, my body aching for rest. I closed my eyes, but it was like the weight of everything was keeping me awake. The resentment bubbled up inside me, threatening to spill over. Jeremy was still in the living room. I could hear the faint sound of his game, and I could feel my frustration turning into something sharper. The silence between us had grown unbearable. We hadn't really talked in weeks. Not about anything that mattered. I had tried, but he would just brush me off or get defensive. It was easier for him to escape into his virtual world than to face the reality of our lives. I rolled over in bed, staring at the ceiling. Jeremy? I called softly. He didn't respond. I sighed and walked into the living room. The room smelled of stale chips and empty soda cans. The glow of the television was the only light. Jeremy, I said again, louder this time. He didn't even glance up from the screen. Not now, sophomore. I'm in the middle of a game. My chest tightened. I opened my mouth to say something, anything. To ask for his help. To ask him why he couldn't just show up for me, for us, for our son. But nothing came out. Instead, I stood there in the doorway, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. The argument came out of nowhere. Or maybe it had been building for months. I had reached my limit. I don't know what made me say it, but the words were out before I could stop myself. I smell of stale food, Jeremy, I snapped. I haven't had a moment to myself in weeks. I've been cooking, cleaning, caring for the baby, and you're sitting here playing games like nothing's wrong. He finally looked at me, his expression more annoyed than anything. You always do this. You always turn everything into a big deal. I'm just trying to unwind. Why can't you just chill for once? My hands shook with fury. Unwind? While I'm here alone, trying to keep this household from falling apart? I'm not your mother, Jeremy. I'm not here to serve you. He stood up, now visibly irritated. Don't start with me, sophomore. You've been in a mood for weeks. You're just mad because I'm not catering to you like I used to. Maybe if you didn't let yourself go, I'd actually want to spend time with you. I felt the words hit me like a slap across the face. Let myself go. I repeated, the sting of his words sinking in. Is that what you think? I'm doing everything I can, and you're too busy playing video games all day. His eyes narrowed, and I saw the anger flicker in his gaze. You're acting crazy, you know that? You need to calm down, and that was it. That was the moment. The moment I realized I had nothing left to give. The next day, I had cooked a huge dinner. I had slaved over a hot stove for hours, making sure the meal was just right, just like I always did. The baby had been fussy all day, and I had barely had time to eat anything myself. But I made sure the food was on the table, hot and ready for him. Jeremy came into the kitchen, his eyes flickering briefly to the steaming plates before landing on me. "I'm not hungry," he muttered, his gaze not meeting mine. I felt the bile rise in my throat. "What do you mean, you're not hungry?" "I just made this entire meal." I said. "I'm not hungry," he interrupted, and I could feel the heat of his words burning my skin. I stared at him for a long moment, trying to keep the tears back. "Fine," I whispered, turning to walk away, but he called out to me, his voice suddenly soft. "Wait. Are you going to eat with me?" I froze. I didn't want to. I didn't want to sit down and pretend everything was okay, not when he'd made me feel so insignificant. But I didn't say anything. Instead, I walked out of the kitchen and into the living room. I sat down on the couch, still feeling that anger, still feeling that pain. But then, when I heard him beg for the food, something inside me broke. He was begging me for the food he had once taken for granted. The realization hit me like a freight train. Jeremy didn't just neglect me. He didn't just ignore me. He had disrespected me, belittled me, and treated me like I was nothing more than a servant to his whims. He could beg for the food all he wanted, but I was done. The baby stirred in his crib, and I walked toward him, picking him up gently. As I rocked him in my arms, I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. But I knew I was making the right decision. It wasn't just about the games. It wasn't just about the dirty dishes or the endless laundry. It was about respect. It was about love. And I had given him both in abundance, but all he had given me in return was neglect and scorn. As I looked down at my son, I whispered, "We deserve more than this." I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to keep sacrificing my dignity, my happiness, and my sanity for a man who couldn't see me, who couldn't appreciate me. The sun was still low in the sky when I woke up the next morning. The soft, muted light filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across the room. I felt the weight of everything pressing down on me, but for the first time in weeks, I didn't immediately jump up to start the day. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the quiet around me. The house was still. The baby was still sleeping in his crib. And Jeremy was still nowhere to be found. The silence should have been comforting, but it felt suffocating. The anger from last night hadn't left me. In fact, it had only deepened. The way he had looked at me, dismissing my feelings, making me feel so small, like I was the one being unreasonable for wanting help, for wanting respect. I knew I had to do something about it, but I wasn't sure what. I turned my head to look at the clock beside my bed. It was nearly 8 a.m. Jeremy would probably still be in the living room, glued to the screen, playing his game as usual. My chest tightened at the thought. I could hear faint sounds from the other room, the familiar clicks of the controller, the occasional shout of excitement or frustration. It made my blood boil. How could he continue like this? How could he ignore everything that was falling apart around us? I sighed, slowly getting out of bed. My body ached as I stood up, the exhaustion weighing me down like a heavy cloak. The baby started to stir, and I walked over to the crib, picking him up gently. He cooed and blinked sleepily, his small hands reaching up for me. His innocent eyes looked at me, trusting, full of love, and for a moment, the world felt like it had paused. I kissed the top of his head, trying to steady myself. He deserved more than this. More than the chaos, more than the neglect. He deserved a mother who felt whole, who didn't have to fight for respect, for attention, for her own sanity. I walked into the kitchen with him in my arms, trying to focus on the present. I needed to make breakfast. I had to feed him, take care of him, as always. But something inside me was screaming that I didn't have to do it alone anymore. I didn't want to do it alone anymore. I set the baby down in his high chair, placing a small bowl of oatmeal in front of him. He giggled, reaching for the spoon, making a mess as always. It was a small, normal moment, one that I could hold on to. But then, the inevitable happened. The sound of Jeremy's footsteps echoed down the hallway. He entered the kitchen, his eyes still glazed over from whatever had consumed him in the game. He ran a hand through his messy hair, clearly still in that dazed, disconnected state. I didn't even look at him at first. My hands were busy preparing a bottle for the baby, moving methodically, trying to hold on to some sense of control in the storm swirling inside me. But then, Jeremy spoke. "Soft," he said, his tone low, but not in a soft way, more in a dismissive, irritated way. "Are you going to cook today or what? You know, we're running out of groceries." I froze for a moment, the words hitting me like a slap across the face. "We're running out of groceries?" I bit my lip to keep from snapping. "I've been the one taking care of everything," I thought. "I've been managing the house, the baby, the meals, the laundry, everything, while you sit there and do nothing. And now you're telling me you want me to cook again," but instead of lashing out, I just turned to him slowly, my hands shaking. I looked him in the eye, my gaze cold, unblinking. "No," I said, my voice steady, though I felt a storm inside me. "I'm not cooking today." He blinked, clearly taken aback by my response. "What do you mean you're not cooking? We don't have time for this, sophomore. I've got a busy day ahead, and you can't just skip breakfast." I could feel my patience wearing thinner with every word that came out of his mouth. Every sentence felt like another attempt to brush off my feelings, to minimize what I had been going through. "No, Jeremy," I said again, taking a deep breath to calm myself. "I'm not cooking because I'm done." "Done?" His brow furrowed, his voice rising in disbelief. "What the hell are you talking about? Done with what?" I could feel my chest tighten, the frustration bubbling up, threatening to spill over. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, I saw the man I had married. The man who had promised to love me, to support me, to share in everything. The man who had promised to be my partner in this life, but now? Now, all I saw was someone who had checked out of our relationship long ago. Someone who had taken everything I had to give without giving anything back. "I'm done with this," I said, my voice unwavering. "Done with you expecting me to do everything while you do nothing. Done with being treated like I'm not important. Done with this. This life where I'm invisible." His face twisted into an expression of confusion and then anger. "So now you're going to act like this is all my fault? You think I don't work hard? You think I don't do things for this family? I'm the one who brings in money. I'm the one who has to deal with my own shit, too." I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, the anger starting to burn. "You think I don't know that?" I spat, finally unable to hold back. "You think I don't know you work? But that doesn't mean you get to sit around all day and ignore the rest of us. That doesn't mean you get to act like your needs are more important than mine, more important than the baby's." I paused, my breath shallow as I tried to steady myself. I wasn't trying to pick a fight, but I could feel the years of resentment flooding to the surface. "You're always playing those damn games, Jeremy. Always escaping. But I'm stuck here, doing everything by myself. And I'm not going to keep doing it. Not anymore." Jeremy opened his mouth to argue, but I raised my hand to stop him. "No. I'm done." The finality of the words hit both of us in the quiet that followed. He stared at me for a long moment, the words hanging between us like an unspoken truth. His face softened. And for a split second, I thought I saw something, regret, maybe. But it was gone in an instant. "Well, I'm not the one who's done," he muttered, turning to walk away. "I don't know why you're making such a big deal out of this. You're overreacting." But I didn't follow him. I didn't chase after him. I didn't apologize, because in that moment, I realized something important. The only one who had been overreacting was me. I had been giving everything, silently sacrificing my own happiness, my own well-being, all for someone who was taking it for granted. It was time to stop, and as Jeremy disappeared into the living room, I stood there in the kitchen, holding my son, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a strange sense of peace. I was done. And for the first time in a long while, I was ready to take back control.